My name is Sipokazi Sigenu, and I'll be your program facilitator for today. I would like to thank all of you for accepting MISTRA's invitation to attend its book launch on Land in South Africa, Contested Meanings and Nation Formation. Let me start off with the boring housekeeping rules and those out of the way because I am sure that we are all anxious to hear MISTRA's research findings and policy recommendations on this critical national problem. Our housekeeping rules are the usual. We want to ask you to please mute your mics at all times during this launch. And we would like to request you to please switch your videos off, and only the speaker presenting may have their video and mic switched on. And the questions and comments are encouraged through the chat function, which will be addressed during the discussion later. And I want to also ask you to please include those ones that did not get the privilege of joining us today through live tweeting under the hashtag #LandInSA. So the purpose of today's program is to basically offer you a glimpse into the research findings, which will hopefully encourage you to purchase the publication. It's only 340 a copy. But equally important, we want to influence from an evidence-based perspective the debates and policies on land reform in South Africa. So our Director of Operations, Dr. Yakub Abba Omar, will officially welcome us today. He's also contributed a chapter in the publication titled Nationalisms and Nation Formation in South Africa. Over to you, Abba.
Thank you, Sipokazi. Very formal introduction, so thank you very much. Program Director, Minister, Comrade Toko Didiza, I'm glad we're seeing you after the Minister of Finance had made some nice announcements for your and allocations for your department. So you can hopefully have a small celebration with us today. Comrades, colleagues, friends, all protocols observed. Welcome on behalf of the Executive Director, Joel Nechatanze. He's running a few minutes late, so hopefully he'll join us while this meeting is continuing. I'm really pleased to be, on this occasion, opening the launch of MISTRA's latest baby. As you know, the title is Land in South Africa, Contested Meanings and Nation Formation. Now, colleagues may be aware that MISTRA's work is focused on several core themes. And they, one is broadly around issues around mining. There's a lot of work we do around innovations, what we do around political economy. We also have what we call a civilizations kind of theme that looks at things like what made China successful, for example, or what is South Africa's nation formation and social cohesion all about. And we are celebrating our 10th anniversary, and I think we're quite pleased with the fact that within the first 10 years, we produced about 21 reports. It's quite a formidable achievement with the small group of researchers that we have. We managed to do our work effectively because this small group of researchers actually helped create a platform whereby a number of other contributors can come in from different institutions. So whether you're from WITS, we don't mind you, and whether you're from UWC or Stellenbosch or anywhere else, you are welcome on the platforms that MISTRA creates as part of its research project. And part of its transdisciplinary approach ensures that we bring in different perspectives, different disciplines into the project. So this book is really good in the sense that you've got a range of academics, lawyers, practitioners, etc., that have come together to develop the ideas that you would find in the various chapters. And in many senses, it's unique because it falls within the kind of, what people would often consider as the economic issues about land and so forth, and the humanities issues around nation formation and social cohesion. There's a tendency to look at land only in agricultural sense and so forth. So what we've done is look at land in terms of belonging, identity, at the core of our research questions. We also have looked at the legal and judicial issues that impact on land. The book itself speaks to the challenges of social cohesion and why is it important to resolve the land question. I think many of you know that a huge project that the Mapungubwe Institute is involved in is called the Indlula Miti Scenarios Project. And this project looked at the question of social cohesion and identified 3 key drivers that will impact on the future of South Africa. And one of the most important one was what we call the triple R of resentment, reconciliation, and reparations. And we're trying to make sure that in looking at the land question, we keep that in mind, that what is it that we require to do to ensure that we arrive at the kind of social compacts that our society needs so that we build a nation that we can all be proud of and that we have a place in. So in conclusion, I just want to say congratulations to all those that have been involved in delivering this baby. It's a beautiful baby, like all babies, but the main thing is to ensure that it has legs, that it is able to be applied, it is able to be taken up by policymakers, by decision makers, and so forth. So I hope that the baby matures very quickly. During the rest of the program, all the chapter contributors would be acknowledged, and the people that played a big role in producing the book. As you know, there's a lot of editing, layout, design, etc., that goes into this. So I'm not going to steal the thunder of people that will be doing the vote of thanks, but let me only acknowledge 2 people. That is Kwezi Mabaso and Bulel Mabaso. They keep assuring me it's purely professional. They're not related, and I see there's a few Mabasas in the group of participants that are present today. So I'm glad you are well represented here. And Minister, I hope you will enjoy this engagement that you'll be seeing for the next hour and a half. And we look forward to continuous engagement with you on this project that we have just completed. Thank you. Over to you, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Abba, for that very warm welcome. I think now it's time to start with today's discussion. So we'll just cut straight to the chase now that the formalities are over. So, I mean, obviously, it cannot come as a surprise to all of us that MISTRA would undertake research on land reform in South Africa. But I'm sure some of you might be questioning our timing on this because the Constitutional Review Committee has already taken written submissions, and also they are due to conclude their process in March this year of reviewing the Section 25 of the Constitution. But also, we know that the Presidential Advisory Panel on Land Reforms also submitted their report last year in July. But although we know that such research would have served these processes well, as MISTRA, we do take pride in interrogating issues free from the pressures of immediate application. And because this is in line with our positioning of taking a long-term view of the strategic challenges the country is facing. Our first speaker, who is the co-editor of the publication, and who is also senior researcher here at MISTRA, Kwezi Mabasa, will provide us with an overview of the publication's conceptual framework as well as its themes. So over to you, Kwezi.
Thank you, Program Director, the Honorable Minister, the leadership of MISTRA, comrades, colleagues, and friends, all protocol observed. Land reform has been elevated in South Africa's public policy debates in recent years for various political and socio-economic factors. This increased attention has culminated in the publication of two significant reports reviewing post-apartheid land reform in the past 26 years. The Presidential Advisory Panel Report on Land Reform and Agriculture, and the Commission report for the high-level panel on the assessment of key legislation. Now, both these reports investigate the systemic reasons for land reform failures since the democratic transition. These include, amongst others, policy incoherence, weak state capacity, fiscal constraints, and poor governance. The various governments responsible for overseeing land-related regulation have, of course, over the past year and a half, attempted to accommodate these recommendations from these reports. And as the chairperson has stated, Parliament's ad hoc committee has also been doing work around amending Section 25 of the Constitution. The MISTRA publication contributes to these important policy developments by exploring land reform through a different lens. It discusses the contested and multiple meanings of land and their relation to nation formation. The book amplifies the interconnectedness between the economic, cultural, political, and sociological factors underpinning land reform perspectives in South African society. And there are two fundamental questions that the contributors address throughout the entire book. The first one is, what are the varied meanings of land in South Africa? And how should South Africans incorporate these varied meanings of land into land governance and policy formulation in pursuit of a socially cohesive nation? The book relies on documented literature analysis, but we've purposefully elevated the voices of citizens through case studies based on extensive interview data and life history approaches. These cut across rural and peri-urban settings in order to accommodate how different geographic contexts influence land justice, demands, and contested meanings of land. This volume also alludes to some of the legislative debates around land tenure in urban townships and informal settlements. The case studies are not limited to South Africa. We also explore the politics of land reform in 5 countries located in different regions of the world. The core argument of this book states that land shapes essential pillars in nation formation, such as citizenship, political identity, heritage, a sense of belonging, and social disparities. These pillars cannot be fully understood within a paradigm that reduces land to a commodity. Thus, the contributors in this book argue that it is important to go beyond the productivist land approach and explore the contested meanings of land in society. These varied meanings challenge traditional land reform perspectives articulated by government and private and non-state policymakers over the past 26 years. They encourage South Africans to approach land tenure, redistribution, and restitution policies differently. Contributors make the case for these varied meanings of land to be integrated into the overall framework of land reform in South Africa in order to decrease landlessness, policy incoherence, conflicts over land, and what we call continued land disposition. This integration of these varied meanings into the overall framework of land reform necessitates strengthening what Deborah James calls land-based citizenship and creating a policy environment conducive for deepening land rights across the country. The book shows how meaningful local community participation in land governance and decision-making is a valuable component of land-based citizenship. It requires powerful stakeholders, such as state officials, traditional leaders, and large corporations to follow legislative prescripts governing land tenure, with a particular emphasis on consultation. The consultation should acknowledge the varied ways in which communities interact with land and accommodate non-economic meanings of land, such as identity formation, culture, heritage, and religion. The case studies and recommendations in this book provide insights for achieving an inclusive approach to land governance. Deepening democratic practices in land policy implementation will decrease the persisting race, class, gender, and cultural inequalities in post-apartheid land power relation. The book emphasizes the necessity of elevating community agency in the context of commercial land development. A socially cohesive nation formation process in South Africa requires land reform policies that address social inequalities, accommodate varied meanings of land in developing legislation, and create a conducive policy environment for exercising land-based citizenship. The book is divided into three main sections. The first section, entitled Land Citizenship and Nation Formation, explores the relationship between these three factors. These contributors initiate discussions and policy proposals on two cardinal themes in the book: building localized land-based citizenship and restructuring land governance. Social conflicts and inequality persist when some stakeholders are excluded from decision-making, causing them to experience land tenure insecurity or dispossession. These trends are not appropriate for building a national land policy approach that strengthens social cohesion in the nation formation process. The chapters in section 1 amplify the necessity of maintaining transparent and accountable stakeholder relations in land development negotiations. They urge stakeholders to clarify and strengthen legislation governing meaningful and informed consents as the legislation is currently vague. Another important contribution in section argument advanced in section 1 is the contradiction between different land policies and most citizens' relationships with the land. The evidence presented throughout the book shows that South Africa's post-apartheid land policy framework fails to accommodate the land tenure systems of the majority of the Black African population. Policy measures are proposed to resolve this contradiction in order to strengthen land tenure of the most marginalized citizens. These proposals posit an alternative tenure system, which requires a reconceptualization of land tenure legislation, governance, and jurisprudence. Another significant takeaway from section 1 is the importance of considering the different values and associations with land when implementing restitution policies. As argued earlier, land is a contested concept with multiple layered meanings permeating socioeconomic, cultural, and political aspects of human development. The authors show how different land reform policies introduced in the post-apartheid era have inadequately accommodated these meanings. South African struggles for land have always been synonymous with political advocacy for the attainment of lost identity, heritage, belonging. And these factors continue to shape citizenship in urban, peri-urban, and rural communities 26 years after the attainment of democracy. In other words, what we're emphasizing here when it comes to rethinking restitution is the point that is made by land scholars around the non-tangible forms of dispossession that underpin calls for land justice, or what is referred to as the dignity takings. So the chapters in section 1 suggest a new approach to land restitution and compensation that accommodates both the varied meanings of land, but also a notion of compensation that goes beyond monetary value, that understands that dispossession is inherently tied to the non-tangible, or what we call the dignity takings. The second section, entitled Agrarian Reform and Social Justice, explores what Ben Cousins describes as the agrarian question of the dispossessed. And there are three main takeaways from this second section. The first is that the agrarian question in a social justice and redress context is not limited to developing large-scale commercial agriculture. Rather, it is related to comprehending the multiple agrarian livelihood sources developed around land use in low-income communities across different geographic locations. The chapters argue for strengthening existing agrarian and land-based livelihood activities in communities by providing subsidies, securing land tenure, and facilitating improved access to global commons such as water, seeds, and land. The other takeaway from the second section is the relationship between agrarian citizenship, identity formation, and social cohesion. This comes out strongly in these case studies, which amplify the connection between land, agrarian livelihoods, class, and gender. The chapters develop a case for centering unequal class formation and gender relations in agrarian public policy formulation. They posit several policy recommendations for rethinking dominant approaches to land use and development in communities. The chapters in this section also show the current disconnection between land policies and citizens' conceptions of land use. The evidence illustrates that land ownership and use must not be reduced to commercial value. All the accounts point to the myriad meanings and values associated with land in these communities. The third and last section in the book focuses on the international case studies. And these case studies are not limited to the African continent, but they are case studies that are based in different regions of the world: Africa, the Middle East, and South America. And there are four main lessons to get from this section on the international case studies. The first one is that the case studies reveal how the evolution of nation formation is inextricably connected with land redistribution or restitution. In other words, land policy developments are essential for nation building and remaking the nation. This comes out strongly in the chapters on Brazil and the Palestinian land struggles. The second point that take away from the last section is the importance of land civil society and participatory citizenship. Citizen agency is presented as a crucial factor in determining land and agrarian power relations. These relations are shaped by the strength of civil society movements advancing social transformation in land and agrarian political economies. This raises questions about the strength of South Africa's land-based movement in the post-apartheid era and its ability to embed this notion of land-based citizenship. And this comes out strongly, again, when we compare the South African case to what happened in Mozambique and Zimbabwe. The other important point that, or takeaway that arises out of the last section is the role of the post-colonial states in modern forms of disposition. This places both the states and markets at the center of contemporary disposition. Professor Sam Moyo and Pontiac describe this as a new scramble over African lands for agriculture, mining, natural resource attraction, and entailing. The book argues that this trend can only be ameliorated through fortifying land regulatory regimes, building active citizenship, and localized social compacting. Program Director, I'd like to end my overview of the book with a quote from the anthropologist Ferguson, which I think captures the central message and argument in the book. And it states that attention to the broader question of land's multiple uses and meanings can help to explain why land is valued and desired in ways that agricultural utility alone cannot.
Thank you very much, Kwezi, for that comprehensive editor's overview. I hope now there's an appreciation of why we needed to explore this national question beyond the constitutional expropriation debates. And I really do commend MISTRA and the authors for integrating the multiple of land in this publication, as well as addressing the long-standing inequalities across the three spheres of land policy making. But also another critical factor is how the publication illustrates the importance of democratizing land governance relationships between state authorities, private sector companies, traditional leaders, as well as communities in the contemporary area. So our next session in the program will include a panel discussion from the three authors, and they will provide us with in-depth summaries of their chapters. We will start with Bulelwa Mambasa. She is co-editor of this publication, but she's also director and head of the Land Reform, Restitution and Tenure Practice area at Werkman's Attorneys. And she was also a member of the Presidential Advisory Panel on Land Reform. Her chapter is on decolonizing laws and policies to represent the people. Thank you, Bulelwa. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Thank you to the MISTRA leadership for the seminal piece of work. At least that's what I believe that it is. Thank you to Minister Didiza for joining this book launch. I would also like to greet all our friends in the public and private sector. As you have correctly stated, Program Director, my chapter specifically deals with decolonizing laws and policies to represent the people. I think as an attorney and as a lawyer that has been in practice for 18 years and mainly focused on issues around land reform, it became very clear to me that there is one fundamental exercise that we have not done. And when I say we, that includes Parliament, policymakers, and so forth. When the Constitution was promulgated in 1996, there's a very important provision there which directs us, which basically says that when the Constitution was promulgated, all the laws that were laws before that date remained, unless those laws were amended or repealed. So in essence, what am I saying? What this chapter is saying is that we inherited laws, and in particular land laws, that were not fit for purpose. Those laws that we are currently sitting with as our legacy of land laws are the laws that formed the foundation of dispossession in South Africa. And what this chapter really does, it first traces the foundations of South African law of property and land, and it traces and gives you examples of how those laws have actually survived post-Constitution, and that they still are the center of the reality of the South African condition. It's well documented that the South African property law framework is based on Roman Dutch and English principles. And that in its own is not a perversion. But what that does is that you find these principles, values that have crept into the way in which we legislate for land and land reform. The other issue is that the legacy that we have in respect of the Roman Dutch culture, if you like, is that the only laws only recognize land or property as a real right that is held by an individual or an object. And that, of course, does not sit very well with the way in which many communities interact with land in our country. So what we're ending up with is that although we have the Deeds Registry Act, which, as I said, only recognizes real rights, and those real rights are defined in a particular way, we end up having a deeds registry that does not include the vast, overwhelming majority of people in South Africa. And yes, the deeds registry has been hailed as reliable and amongst the best in the world. However, it only caters for those in the formal sector. That's the first point. The second point is this: the way in which we view land and the way in which we view property, on the other hand, have always been dichotomous. What do I mean by that? When we talk about land reform, everybody, or let me not say everyone, but the majority or the popular view is that we're picturing people in a rural area that want to farm, that want to plant. And then when we talk about property and the property sector, suddenly we find ourselves in the formalized environment where we're talking about mortgage bonds, and we're talking about lease agreements, surface rights, deeds registries, registration, transfer of property. So I am saying that if we want to meaningfully change the ownership patterns, and not even the ownership patterns, but land holding in general, we have to look at the ways in which we have treated these property on one hand, that is valued, that is valuable, that includes each and intellectual property and so forth, as superior to, for example, the land reform projects. So what this book does is that, as I said, we trace these foundations and the South African common law property system. I give examples of where and how we have done that. I also look at the pre-colonial conceptions of property that continue to exclude the majority of South Africans. I can give an example of the Alienation of Land Act. This is an act that governs everyone in South Africa who has immovable property. And this act has formal requirements around, you've got to, your sale agreement has to be in writing. The sale agreement is only concluded upon transfer. The sale agreement will only be, or the sale will only be recognized upon registration. All of this is a great law, but what this law doesn't envisage is that over 31 million South Africans don't vest in that system. So that law is as good as it doesn't end up doing what it's there to do, because it will only then cater for those that vest in the formal property system. Even when you look at things like what are the remedies available for people that have lost land, without getting too technical and using too much Latin because of my legal background, but even common law remedies, such as claiming back what is yours, which is called a reivindicatio. That's what afford owners of property to reclaim stolen land. But this is not available to someone that holds informal rights within the system. And then we also speak then about how customary notions of landholding and occupation differ from common law. Our common law, as I said, it's being inherited from the Roman, Dutch, and English law principle, does not take into account these nuances and complexities. So it goes into a lot of detail around describing the tenure during colonial periods, and two major misconceptions. That is that the Western concept of ownership could be applied universally. And the second misconception is that colonized societies were too underdeveloped to apply concepts of ownership to the manner in which they interacted with land. So we need to get to a point where the discussions around communal land, customary land, and so forth become more nuanced. And we do need to do more work into understanding these customary notions of landholding. What this book also does, it also then debunks the myth that if you are Black and you come from a rural area, the way that land is held is always communal. So this book also traces historical ways in which actually communal societies have in fact had land holding in in private, and that it's not altogether an issue around communal holding vesting communally. So we also touch on expropriation concepts, that expropriation, with understanding expropriation in itself, it's also got to be understood in the context of traditional leadership, and that actually expropriation is not new to communal notions of landholding, and that there are states that, that even individuals under customary law are provided with status and rights. So as we continue to make laws and policies around tenure and how communities should hold land, we should disabuse ourselves of the, I think, simplistic and narrow view that communal or rural communities can only survive on communal tenure. So it's basically a call to then look deeply and look at a historical framework that tells us about how truly communal tenure, took place, and also how dynamic it's been over time. Luckily, I know that I've got William that's going to, Prof. Baynard, he's going to speak more on this, but I'm glad to say that there is consensus around the fact that communal citizens are not necessarily beholden to this idea that they should all hold land communally as well. So we also look at ways in which legislating for customary tenure should actually happen. I saw something earlier on Twitter around the traditional courts bill that is going to be tabled. I think it would be interesting to look at those developments, and hopefully what is contained in this chapter, and certainly the chapter written by Peter Delius and William Baynard, will be considered as part and parcel of that development. So without really, giving you too much, because you must still buy the book, I think that in conclusion, I want to say that as much as we have Section 25 of the Constitution that is aimed at addressing the issue of land reform, within that process, we need to take into account the fact that land reform is not isolated from property markets, from the formal system. And we need to begin to look deeper into the laws, whether they consciously or unconsciously continue the disposition. We need to identify those laws and make sure that they begin to speak to the issues of heritage and identity of all South Africans. And I think to link what I've just outlined to the introduction that Kwesi made, the big idea around this particular chapter that looks into the laws that continue to be influenced by our colonial past is to say, law governs how we behave. Law governs how policies are made. And if we do not stop to think, are these laws still relevant? How do these laws continue on the path of dispossession? We will not be able to answer the questions around what do we do for the future. We want to bequeath our children and future generations with land justice, with an understanding that the land reform question is not just about compensation or not just about markets and productivism, but that if we were to have a South African identity or South African nation that needs to be formed, then our laws need to start representing us. Then our laws need to represent exactly how we want this new society to look like. We cannot then, this is what this chapter is arguing, we cannot seek to tweak laws that were never formed to have an egalitarian society. We cannot still expect to use those laws to provide us with the solutions of the future. I think I will stop here and let and then we can have a discussion during the panel, during the panel phase. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bulelwa, for that. I think from your contribution, it is very clear that there is still some legislation that continues to perpetuate land inequalities because of the colonial influences that persist in our laws. Professor Baynant will now expand further on these legislation gaps from a tenure perspective. He will be presenting his co-written chapter with Professor Delius titled Securing the Land from Customary Land Tenure to Registered Titled Land. We also issued this chapter as a working paper, so it is available for those of you who will not purchase the publication as yet. You can find Professor Baynant and Professor Delius's chapter on our website. Professor Baynant, if you are ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to talk in the workshop, greatly valued. Our aim in this chapter is to contribute to debates about land tenure in South Africa. We know it's a very complex area. 15 minutes is not enough time to adequately express all of the issues, but we want to focus on one central issue. What is the most secure system of land tenure for those who don't have private titled land? And we're thinking too about increasing socioeconomic capacity on the land and through the land. At present, this debate's rather polarized between different lobbies and interests, those favoring titles registered in the deeds office, those favoring localized customary tenure with or without some form of registration, and those favoring control by traditional authorities. It's not always easy to see common ground, and this does inhibit the emergence of areas of consensus and potential progress. The South African Constitution provides a clear injunction to equalize rights in section 25(6), but the government hasn't yet been able to pass constitutionally acceptable legislation that puts this clause into practice. So we analyze the current position and suggest policy paths that might draw on the strengths of at least some of the different perspectives. So the chapter starts with a brief discussion of landholding in the country, rooted in the history of segregation and apartheid. We won't examine that here. However, we want to emphasize that there have been many forms of tenure historically, and it would be mistaken to suppose that these operated simply on a racial basis. We're also arguing that the primary rights in most forms of customary tenure rested in families. They were not in all respects communal, and they were not directly controlled by chiefs. Our recommendations really are around strengthening a pillar, defining customary law, clearly a statement of rights that really starts with the family, and that hasn't been done adequately, and then a gradual movement to a single national system of land tenure. At present, there isn't a great deal of certainty respecting who has rights to the land in the customary or communal areas of the former Bantustans of South Africa. Is it family heads, families as a whole, local communities, chiefs, traditional councils, or the state? And do they amount to a form of ownership? And how are the layers of landholding and authority? How are they interlinked? There is, however, a great deal of evidence suggesting that landholdings are under threat, especially in places where demand for land has intensified. Landholding customary tenure under traditional councils has been alienated in places such as the Platinum Belt of the Northwest Province, the Anglo-American Mogalakwena Platinum Mine in Limpopo, Somkhele Coal Mine in KwaZulu-Natal, A community at Kolbeni in the Eastern Cape has been threatened with removal for titanium mining. And in all these cases, mining licenses have been approved by the state, and local chiefs, traditional councils have agreed to transfer land. In the case of Bafokeng and Bapo, chiefs have benefited directly by controlling enterprises on the land over which they claim authority. The Ingonyama Trust Act 1994 effectively grants control over all of the customary land in KZN to the Zulu King, and the Trust's board has been attempting to change some of the customary land holdings into leaseholds, which requires payment and implies that the land is owned by the King or the Ingonyama Trust. And the recent Traditional Leaders in Khoisan Leadership Act 2019 enables traditional councils to enter into partnerships with external agencies for the purposes of development. These require consultation with affected communities and a majority vote, but not consent by the specific landowners who may be affected. And in a sense, that's an up for us. And we have seen reports about the Western Mpondo King apparently wishing to enter into a partnership with the Chinese company, and wonder what the rights of the landholders may be over the 10,000 hectares of coastal land that is apparently under discussion. We make the presidential panel of 2019 a key reference point because it is the most recent and very well informed attempt to try to look at these problems in the round. However, we can't really agree with some aspects of it, or perhaps a better way of putting it is that there seem to be contradictions within the panel. Maybe that's not surprising, there were different views. It states, for example, that traditional communal land administration systems are under the jurisdiction and control of Amakosi and their traditional councils. The traditional leaders argue that the current Western imposed legislative framework fails to appreciate the interplay of individual and group rights. We are faced, the authors state elsewhere, with a situation where communalism is at the center of the African lived experience, therefore necessitating a different approach to the land tenure question. Now, we're uneasy with both these statements, and they don't seem to account for historical change, nor realities on the ground. For example, the presidential panel itself records exclusion of women from secure landholding, and the women who give evidence blame the chiefs. This isn't resolved. The number of contested succession disputes around chieftaincy suggests that this isn't a harmonious zone either. And we argue that most people's lives are now more commoditized, and that following rapid urbanization from the 1980s and before, of course, when apartheid laws were loosened, perhaps 65% of people live in urban or peri-urban areas, and change is taking place rapidly within the Bantustans, or those areas that were Bantustans before, and the number of peri-urban dense settlements have greatly increased, maybe over a third, maybe even as half of people live in this sort of context. Thinking about the future of land should take this into account. We also feel that the prohibition on African land ownership during most of the apartheid era had devastating results for the personal wealth of many African families. It was a hidden aspect of racial discrimination that inhibited accumulation and social mobility. It's been removed in the cities, but it's still the possibility of stronger rights that might allow social mobility and accumulation through land is not yet really possible in some rural areas, although in fact in the dense settlements in officially customary areas, there are land markets already. Two landmark judgments in 2018, Maledu and Baleni or Kolobeni, did improve the protection for customary rights through a reinterpretation, a strengthened interpretation by the courts of Ipilra. And this is tremendously good news. The Maledu case and the Baleni case recognized that IPILRA needs to be interpreted in a way that gives it strength, that trumps, in this case, in both of these cases, the Mining Act of 2002, which seems to give very strong rights to those who hold mining licenses. This is a major gain, and we don't underestimate its importance. Nevertheless, this is, in a sense, a defensive position. To be able to do anything with the IPILRA, you have to go to court. How many rural communities can go to court? Not that many. It's expensive. It can only be done, really, with the assistance of pro bono lawyers. And the Land Affairs doesn't, or sorry, what used to be Land Affairs, the department, let me call it, doesn't yet have the capacity, in a sense, to use IPILRA proactively. That seems to us an important route. We also examine cases around customary law and try to show that although there is historical evidence that cases have prioritized the rights of families, this is by no means secure in the legal system yet, either in legislation or in the courts. And to us, this seems a priority. To conclude, let me talk briefly about land administration and how it links into our ideas about a single national landholding system. In 1999, Martin Adams with Manono and Cousins remarked that the existing land administration system was breaking down. This collapse includes loss of records, doubts as to which laws apply, and the unauthorized issues of permits and other documents. The presidential panel, 2019, 20 years later, found that little had changed. The state land system is excessively fragmented and disjointed, and in some contexts has completely broken down, it said. Manono and Kingwell suggest a new system of land administration that gives strong rights to families who hold off-register land, all off-register land. They argue that titles are unsuitable and that attempts to legislate for communal land rights have failed or tend to favor traditional authorities. So they believe in some sort of middle way that first must start with a kind of Land Records Act, legislation of some kind that records what is there and who has rights, and to try to ensure that there is definition of those rights. And their suggestion has been taken up both by the high-level panel of 2017 and the presidential panel. We think this is a very good starting point, and it's important that these rights are recorded and defined. But we also argue that it should go further. I think that the South African titling system, though some people call it very rigid, in fact, is flexible. It's been amended many times and it allows a number of different forms of ownership. It is possible that there might be further amendments. The deeds office and the surveyor general offices are well established with processes that work and experienced officials, and not least, there is powerful backing amongst both black and white people in the society that these institutions should survive. We think that the state needs to invest in them, expand their capacity, innovate with technology, and this may greatly reduce costs of recordal, registration, and transactions, but that this is the way to go slowly for a national system, starting in the urban areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. And thanks to you, Professor Delius, as well, on contributing to this chapter. It made me actually think about something that our Executive Director, Joel Nechitenze, wrote in his preface in the publication. I just want to quote him for a second. Well, it's not even a direct quote, it's a paraphrase where he warns us that if these land debate issues are not focused, they will end up being dominated by narrow productivist agricultural approaches. Worse still, the genuine aspirations of the mass of the people can be appropriated by elites bent on securing assets for themselves in a manner that perpetuates the inherited colonial relations with the change only to the color of the land barons. This is irrespective of the precise form of redistribution, whether it is through current tenure regimes or through state custodianship over land. Now we will move on to our next and last contribution for our panel, Stayeni. She will be elevating the voices of former labor tenants in her chapter titled Land is More Than Farming, Former Labor Tenants' Views on Land Expropriation Without Compensation. I also wish to encourage you, because after STAR, we're going to have a brief discussion, and I wish to encourage everyone to pose their questions on the chat function, because we will not be allowing people to speak in order to save time. Sorry about that, over to us. Sorry, Star, over to you.
All right, thank you, Spogazi, and greetings to everyone. Okay, so my chapter is about the views of former labor tenants and their descendants. They are from Umgungundlovu district in KwaZulu-Natal. So from areas including Richmond, Mbendle, Mshwati, Mbofana, Muden, and Kongolo. So these are former labor tenants who are currently awaiting their land claims to be processed. So these are land claims which they lodged back in 2001. Yeah, so I'm just going to share what they think about land expropriation without compensation and whether or not the constitution should be amended. So let me just maybe give you an outline of what to expect from me in the next 10 minutes. I'll give a brief background sort of story about who these labor tenants were, how did I meet them, how did we have these conversations that I felt were worth writing about in this book. And then I'll move to sharing some of their arguments, which of course they're in the chapter. And then I'll share a few direct quotes from them, and then I'll conclude. All right, so the story: who are these labor tenants, and what about them? So maybe let me give a definition and not assume that everybody knows what a former labor tenant is. So a labor tenant was a Black person living on what had become a white-owned farm through the process of land dispossession. And so they undertook to work for the landowner for part of the year in return for the right to use a small portion of the land for their own purposes, such as grazing, growing crops, and residential. So they paid with so for them to remain on the land, they had to provide labor, cheap labor, or sometimes free labor to white farmers. So I mean, that system is not there anymore, but the concept of labor tenants still remain. The people, they still refer to themselves as labor tenants, and the reason for that is it it's the history that is attached to it. And I'm going to say more about that, because actually their argument about why their views on expropriation without compensation are very much linked to their history. So they're still holding on to let's say, to the label of labor tenants, even though the system does not exist anymore. So I was doing work with a network of NGOs. I think back in 2018, when this debate around the property clause, whether it should be amended or whether there should be compensation without expropriation without compensation, when it was in everyone's lips, one of the NGOs I was working with was also having those kind of similar debates with the former labor tenants that they support. So I participated in a number of those events. But part of that, they were also, because they were at the time in 2018 there were public hearings on whether the constitution must be amended. And so part of our work was to together with the land activists, land claimants, to talk about, okay, so what are you going to submit in the submissions? And so we would gather for a series of meetings and workshops and discussions where people would express what their views were and what they would say when they go to the public hearings. So it was during that time that I started documenting these views, these ideas, and took notes, recorded them, some conversations on my phone. Some were formal because I facilitated some of those conversations, some of those debates, but also some were over lunch in the evenings, just informally with comrades. And so when MISTRA asked me if I could contribute a chapter, I was like, oh yes, actually I do have material. I have these conversations which I thought were so crucial and very intriguing for me to actually, yes, let me write this chapter and let these views be out there. And we would remember that at the time, powerful interest in society played a central role in framing the debate on land expropriation without compensation. Some key questions on the possible impact of expropriation on national food security, export earnings, economic growth were seen as key considerations. So the media presented scenarios of possible economic collapse if land reform proceeded on the basis of what they said was populist considerations. So while the argument to revise the property clause in the Constitution was not new, back already, I use Lungiseleng Ntebeza's work in this chapter, his work published back in 2007, where he was already making an argument around the property clause, saying, well, the way as it stands, it on the one hand, it protects the rights of the land claimants, such as these labor tenants, but on the other hand, it also protects the rights of those who inherited land that was obtained through land dispossession. So it protects everyone, and because of that, we'll always reach sort of a dead end. So those debates were already there, at least in academic spaces, as far back as 2007. And of course, in the broader public discourse that were brought back in 2018, we all know what happened in Parliament, passing of the motion, and so on. So what were the labor tenants saying? What is their view on this question? So there's quite a number of arguments I make in the chapter, but I'm just going to highlight two in the interest of time. One, they're saying, they argue that as Black land claimants who were forcibly dispossessed of land and suffered socio-economic and political exclusion, whose consequences continue to be their experience today, they must get their land back and be compensated for all their suffering. They unreservedly reject the idea of the state paying compensation to particularly white farmers who currently own the land that these former labor tenants and their descendants lodged claims for. So in the chapter, I then elaborate on this history of land dispossession, how labor tenancy came about and how it contributed to the expansion of capitalist commercial agriculture, how Black people's labor was instrumental in that process. So I go into those details just to expand or elaborate on this argument that was made by these comrades. I explain in the chapter what land disposition looked like, because people go into detail about how their houses were burnt, how their livestock was. So what was lost? When you talk about land disposition, what exactly was lost? And so I go into much detail in that chapter. And the emphasis on this history from the conversations with these former labor tenants is that they feel this history somehow, when you look at land reform today and how it's the program itself, how it's designed, and just the debates around it, it seems the history does not really feature in a way that they feel it should feature. What was lost? So when we're doing land reform, what are we really addressing? And then how would then follow. Secondly, the second point, they argue that their land needs and uses are not limited to farming, but they want their land back to live freely where they belong. The dominant framing of the public discourse was based so much on the agricultural production consideration, while the discussions on the national questions, meanings, and uses of land that are not about agricultural production, but are connected to the issues of identity, belonging were muted. And there's another point that they raise, and again, I elaborate on this in the book. Of course, the people I'm talking about here aren't homogeneous. I'm talking about people who came to these focus groups were between 40 and 60, but it was the same people all the time. So they were representatives of labor tenants from different farms in the district. I mentioned the areas from which they came earlier on. So the last part, like I said, I would just share some quotes from the book to elaborate or in support of why they're saying that, well, the constitution has to be changed. They are the people who actually should be compensated for what they lost. And land reform is not just about production. There's more. And if you want to know what that is, then history will have those answers. History of land dispossession and the formation of the labor tenancy system, they argue. So I'll just read a few quotes and then conclude. I open quote. As a young boy, it was very painful to see my father cry as the white man confiscated about 30 of his cattle. We never saw those cattle again. In fact, if you need a cow for umsebenzi today, you buy it from a white man. This is just one quote explaining that how people, like for them, it's the idea of paying compensation to this very same white farmers who continue to abuse them on these farms. It's just so ridiculous. And I'll read another quote. Land means everything to us here. You can come to the farms and ask each and every person here, they will tell you the same thing. Land means having a home for you and your children and their children to come. It means food. It is where our ancestors were buried and where we shall also be buried. The problem with government and all these delays with the processing of our land claims is that they think land is only a farm. Yes, we farm on the land, but that's not the only thing land is for. Another quote, we can't live like we're in prison. There are many South Africans who travel on the N3 over there. All they see are large farms with high fencing. They do not know these are actually prisons to us. We want our land back because we belong here and we have every right to live freely with our dogs, cats, or whoever we like. And then the last quote, which also brings my input to conclusion. If the government pays white farmers for our land, they now call theirs, where will the money come from? Will it come from everybody's tax? How can my land be taken away and then later my tax be used to pay the white farmer who took my land, and be paid compensation? We are being fooled here. They must remove that compensation thing from the Constitution. In a nutshell, the Constitution must be amended. So these are some of the quotes. I mean, there's more in the book. Sorry, in the chapter where I draw from a number of voices in the room. Also drawing on some of, because they didn't agree on everything. So I also highlight some points of contestation amongst the labor tenants, but you will find more of that in the chapter. But the last quote from me raises questions around, I think it's an important question that who should pay for land reform. I think it's something that we need to think about, especially if they put it the way that they put it, that, well, I was dispossessed, my children couldn't go to school because of dispossession, lost livestock, life has been hard, it continues to be hard. And if I have a job somewhere and I pay tax, the very same tax now is gonna go and pay compensation. And so they don't see that as justice. So that's the end of my input. If you want to read more, of course, the book is out. And yeah, happy reading. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Star. This brings us to the conclusion of our contributions from our authors, but it's not the end of the discussion. We still have the Minister of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, the Honorable Ms. Toko Disdiza. So from the three contributions today, we seem to see a golden thread on South Africa's land reform policies. One that highlights how our current legislated land policy prescripts perpetuate the exclusion of most South Africans. And so, Minister, just to quickly introduce you, and so that you can respond to some of these contributions that have been made today. Ms. Didiza served as the first woman Deputy Minister of Agriculture from 1994 to 1999 during the late President Nelson Mandela's tenure. This was followed by her appointment as Minister of Agriculture and Land Affairs from 1994 until 2006. It was during this term of office that Minister Didiza convened the historic National Land Summit in 2005, involving a wide range of stakeholders to reflect on South Africa's land reform policies. She also served as Minister for Public Works from 2006 until 2008. She was appointed as the House Chairperson for Internal Arrangements after her re-election as a Member of Parliament in the 5th administration. And in 2016, she was elected as the Chairperson of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians Africa region. She has served as a member of the National Executive Committee and National Working Committee of the African National Congress from 1997 until 2007, and was re-elected in 2012 to date. Minister Didiza also serves on the board of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation and Ohlange Institute. She has recently been elected as the chairperson of the African Union Ministerial Specialized Technical Committee on Agriculture, Rural Development, Water, and Environment. She holds a BA degree majoring in sociology and politics, a Bachelor of Arts honors degree from the University of South Africa, and a master's degree in tertiary education management from the University of Melbourne in Australia. So with that brief introduction, it is my pleasure to invite the formidable Honorable Minister Didiza to address us.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I'm not sure whether the Executive Director, Mr. Nechitenze, is in the house. If he is, I would like to acknowledge him. Members of the Board of MISTRA, if they are present, I also would like to acknowledge them in this platform. Management and staff, sponsors, if they are here, as well as the contributors to this book who have actually done a sterling work, as well as the editors. I'd like to quote from the words of Sol Plaatje when he commented on the impact of the Native Land Act of 1913. He said, I quote, "Awakening on Friday morning, June 20, 1913, the South African native found himself not actually a slave, but a pariah in the land of his birth," close quote. Program Director, honored guests, it is with honor and privilege that I accepted this invitation to partake in such an important occasion. Writing a book which is well-researched is no small measure. And for that, I would like to actually thank all the contributors to this book for their invaluable contribution, as well as evidence-based research that they've undertaken on a number of policy gaps, as well as legislative programs, which are constraints that they have highlighted even when they were articulating what their chapters are about. I'd also want to thank our international writers who also gave us a perspective of what in the other jurisdictions have happened vis-a-vis land reform, contrasting that with what is happening in our own country. Today marks an important milestone in knowledge production on land and agrarian matters in our country. The book comes at the time in which two most important pieces of legislation are being discussed by lawmakers. One is the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution in order to make explicit what is said to be implicit about powers of the executive to expropriate land in the public interest without compensation. This is the first amendment of the Bill of Rights, which requires substantial majority, an important chapter in our Constitution. We should, as citizens, pay more attention given the implications of what this may have in dealing with historical injustice, while at the same time building a new nation. Secondly, the Amendment of Expropriation Act of 1975 is critical in that for the first time, it expands the need for deprivation in the public interest. Expropriation is a mechanism that countries, including our own, use in order for the state to address the land and property needs of its citizens. In our country, this piece of legislation in the past only dealt with addressing issues for public purposes, even though it served all the majority, but it did not address some of the issues of land inequality that was experienced by the majority. Given the need for redress, it was necessary to align this 1975 Expropriation Act with our Constitution, in particular Section 25, which deals with land and property rights. Soon, government will be tabling the Land Court Bill in Parliament, which, among other issues, will ensure that the Land Court can be one of the permanent courts with permanent judges to deal with issues of land in our country. It is our view that this important step will also ensure the creation of legal jurisprudence in our country as it relates to land matters. The importance of the book we are launching today is that it contributes in the debate that our country must have in addressing the land question, particularly as we deal with land and agrarian reform in post-apartheid South Africa. The first chapter of the book raises important nexus between land, identity, and nation building. I open my remarks with the words of Sol Plaatje because it captures well the meaning of the promulgation of the 1913 Native Land Act. It spoke of a section of society whose nationhood was emasculated. Today, they had a place called home, and the next day, on the 20th of June 1913, they had none. It was only a wait for the inevitable. They did not know when they were going to be moved and where they would be thrown. This chapter of the book, therefore, reminds us how the land question needs to address the issues of nation building. The 1997 Land White Paper envisioned the same. However, what is still missing is the how, particularly if addressing the historical injustices of dispossessed will also mean taking from those who were the beneficiaries of this act of injustice. Ms. Yeni has just indicated what Nsebenza had actually said when reflecting on Section 25 of our Constitution, where he clearly said, if one looks at what that property clause encapsulates, on one hand, it gives property rights to those who have, at the same time, giving an injunction for the state to address those who are landless and who were dispossessed. How practical is that? The other section of the book raises important question of the meaning of land by our citizens, in that land has multifunctional uses. It is about heritage, identity, culture, providing a home, food security, a sense of belonging, and economic use. This is a critical issue given the debates in our society, and at times by us in the policy space who look narrowly at land reform, a point of view of only its capacity for agricultural productivity, human settlement, mining, and industrialization. This debate forgets the meaning of land for the majority. At the same time, this debate must address the issues that were raised by the court case when it comes to one of our legislation, which is the upgrading of land tenure rights, particularly where the gender dimension of land ownership in our country, particularly in the homelands, is still part, former homelands rather, is still part of the challenge, but not only in the homelands. You would still find the same questions when it comes to issues, or rather areas of inheritance and how these are dealt with. Particularly in a family, you would find that the will bequeaths the son the right to ownership of a house or even of land without bequeathing the same for a girl child. And these are the issues which have been brought to the fore as we deliberate on our issues of land and agrarian reform. Bulela in her chapter raises, in my view, issues that we should not forget: the continued influences from the colonial era in policy formulation and legislative reform. One of the examples I could find, which Bulela also touches on as I reflected on the subject, relates to the Communal Property Association legislation, which provides for collective land ownership for those who have received land restitution. While the legislation has been necessitated by the reality of ownership in collective forms, it has become an albatross those who are tied together by this form of collective ownership, particularly that a number of the beneficiaries today may not necessarily have been the original owners of those assets directly, and therefore don't share a common knowledge with one another, or even some form of understanding, and therefore creates difficulty when they now become the beneficiaries of this land and have to develop new relations which have been formed during the land claim process rather than having been there for many, many years. Maybe a question we need to answer is not only a legacy that all colonial societies faced, but how do we extricate ourselves from these? More so, those societies who have descendants of the settler communities who have become an integral part of the nation building process have become citizens of the new states. How do we actually deal with the future and also appreciating some of the history of the dispossessed and how their rather issues would emerge in formulating new policy that will deal with the issues of their redress. In a discussion, Bulelwa proposes several policy measures that lawmakers must take into consideration as they draft legislation, particularly as it points to tenure reform. And this is another issue that has also been raised in the input by Yeni as she's reflecting on the matters of the labor tenants. And when one thinks of some of the cases of land restitution that has been dealt with, also reflects on how even in the evolution post the 1913 Land Act, there were new land, I would say, ownership patterns that emerged as people used different forms, either through land syndicates to actually acquire land, and how the class dimension also came into the fore, where those who were able to acquire land, who are part of those who were dispossessed, also had to take people as lodgers. And sometimes these competing rights post-liberation has posed difficulties. One of such cases was in Limpopo, where the collective claim was lodged, and just before the settlement, 6 families emerged and actually said, we actually had title on this land. The people you are now restituting as a community were actually lodgers in our own land. I don't think at the time of conceiving our land reform policy, one would have understood the multiplicity of ownership patterns that actually even continued and were new realities of the post-1913 Land Act. The issues of land that people bought as collectives through using the churches such as mainland churches in the then past have not actually been articulated as how do you deal with the new, given the historical experiences on ownership. And I guess as the team are going to be doing more work on this area, maybe they can also look at some of these issues and how this would influence policy formulation going forward. I want to agree with Bulelwa that there is a need for framing a new narrative that seeks to decolonize and develop new legal jurisprudence that will address our own lived reality as a society in transition. Yeni in her chapter also takes us on the issue of labor tenants. The question I've been grappling with for some time is whether in our policy framing, we were correct in having different treatment of labor tenants and those who actually lodged their claim through restitution. Is it because the others left and others remained, either by choice or maybe they also remained by design by the new owners? Did that make them different in terms of their claims vis-a-vis those who were forcibly removed? And I think these are some of the issues in this discourse we need to continue to reflect on them. The international experience brought through the chapters by other scholars help us to broaden our minds on how in other jurisdictions where land and agrarian reform took place dealt with some of the issues that we're facing today. What lessons can we learn from that? These schools bring the importance of agency, in particular the role of the landless masses on how they can drive land reform and bring into sharp focus the need for policy change. And I think this policy brief by MISTRA helps us to actually reflect on the issues that were raised by the Presidential Advisory Panel on Land and Agrarian Reform, which actually recommended to government that there's a need to relook at the land policy, or rather the land white paper of 1997. And I would agree, and this is what Cabinet has also agreed, because I think given the experience of 26 years, it will enable us to then relook at some of the tenets that were actually articulated by that 1997 white paper. Whether are they real, given what we know now? What is it that we need to do going forward? And I think these are the interesting debates that, in my view, would not just remain as debate in society or among scholars or activists, but they should find expression in policy formulation and legislative reform. And I would want to say, as the Minister of Land Affairs, I'm really heartened that such, work has been done, and I'm sure we'll be able to build on it and find collaboration with MISTRA, as well as other university institutions, on how we can actually build a strong land administration, for instance, one of the things that emerged. But also, how do we unravel some of those last agreements before the dawn of the new democracy, particularly the issue of the Ngonyama Trust, which has been raised also by one of the scholars. And I think it would take us back, not just in the dawn of democracy and the agreements that the National Party government actually made during that time, but I think it would also bring us back on the issues of our colonial past, because of the perspectives that particularly the British governments at the time reflected, and they framed how the various so-called provinces in our country and the various land administration and ownership will be defined. You'll find the same as the issues of Mgababa in KwaZulu-Natal are starting to come to the fore, where people are making a claim of how they were compensated by actually partnering with the British Army during the wars of dispossession in our country. So how do we unravel some of these things with an aim of actually dealing with our present and our future? At the same time, how do we navigate the issues of how we deal with issues of land in a country where we still, feel very sensitive about issues of race, issues of social justice, where we're not necessarily sharing the same perspective? How do we make sure that land ownership can actually bring inclusivity and actually deal with issues of gender in our society and the empowerment of women in particular? So I would like to actually congratulate MISTRA for this work, as well as thank the contributors to the book. And hopefully we will continue the engagement with yourselves, but also stay what you have said, the landless group and ourselves, the discourses that we have been having, trying to look at how we relook at issues of policy, will also continue. I want to say congratulations and thank you once again for allowing me to give some remarks in this important occasion. And I must say, Spogazi, that though we are not at MISTRA, but at least today I got a good present from the Minister of Finance on the budget that have been given. to the Department of Agricultural Land Reform and Rural Development. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister Didiza. We really appreciate you for prioritizing this engagement, despite the pressures of the budget speech. Starting now to become cognizant of the time, we are supposed to end our discussion at 5 to 6. And I see some of the authors have tried to respond to the questions on the chat function, but I do want to maybe just read a few that the authors can attempt to answer. The one is from Nancy Kachingwe. She says, thanks so much for the excellent presentations. My question is whether the land reform contestations are really around meaning or in fact around an ever more complex array of interests and politics on the one hand and on the other. A state that is unable to set a direction for land reform, post-willing buyer, willing seller. Is it not the case that persistent contestation around meaning is the result of state prevarication in confronting the conflict between local or global capital and popular or community demands for compensation and redistribution? I think I will delegate this one to either Bulelwa or Kwezi, but I think Bulelwa, you can try and tackle this one. And then Kwezi can take the one from Refilwe regarding the gender. She's asked if there's considerations on the increased demands of female laborers in various spaces. Are you considering the increased roles and ownership by women, or are you thinking of what social injustices are being addressed in the modern relationships with land? And there was also one directly to Professor Bainant, and they were asking if there are examples where municipalities or government have developed land use governance and management policies based on the local systems of traditional communities or informal communities, rather than translating existing land use policies or town planning schemes as a point of departure. So in that order, it will be Bulelwa, then Kwezi, and then Prof. Bainant, and then depending on time, we'll see if we won't read out more comments.
Thank you very much, Sipho. I think this book does address this question quite pointedly. This book makes the point that the land question is not solely about economics. It's not just about socio-economic issues, that it's not an intellectual debate for lawyers, that it is not just about parliamentarians, it's not about political leadership. What this book seeks to do is to disabuse ourselves of that notion that land reform is a discussion that is a no-go area or a sensitive one. We want to descend the discussion where it belongs, and that is with the people. And that's where, for example, Ste's chapter becomes crucial, because her work deals with exactly the voices of labor tenants, and many other chapters that look at case studies that elevate the voices of communities. So I think we're now at a point where we shouldn't be concerned about whether the land reform issues are political, whether they have meaning. I think we have all established at this point that land is meaningful for its own sake, but for many other reasons, and that it's multi-layered and it's got multiple meanings. But more than that, that the issue about land reform has to come out of just discussions in Parliament or in academic papers or with intellectualism, but that the South African citizenry should begin to own this issue, drive it, and actually, away from the tendency for all of us to say, well, it's a sensitive issue, it's an emotive issue. I think 26 years down the line, looking at where we are as a society today, it most certainly should be something that is owned by the people, by communities, rural and urban, and our laws, as I said, should translate themselves into that framework. So I don't think we should still be asking whether we're talking about land reform. Is it because of politics, or is it because people want land for the sake of it? So yeah, I think I will leave it there and hand over to Kwesi to answer the next question. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So let me address the questions that were directed towards me by yourself. So gender does come up strongly in the book, 2 areas. The first area is the critique on the different pieces of legislation that have governed communal tenure, and how they've actually exacerbated gender inequalities when it comes to land and food security. It also comes up in the debate in the book around agrarian reforms, particularly when it pertains to what the book argues is a bias towards large-scale agriculture. And as we know, in South Africa and all over the continent, it is small-scale agriculture, especially non-commercial small-scale agriculture, is led by women. That chapter also then raises issues around women's access to the primary inputs that are required to maintain food security in communities, land, water, and so forth. And then there's also a deeper critique around, which also speaks to gender, around the agrarian political economy, which is, a lot of people argue that South Africa's, it's got national food security, and that we've got a very efficient food security system. But we actually have a huge challenge when it comes to household and community food security. And the citizens who bear the brunt of that through both their domestic labor, but also because of the sacrifices that they make, are mostly Black African women in urban, peri-urban, and rural areas. So that's where the issues of gender address. Sorry, Chair, I'm going to abuse also, I think it's important to address this question. In the chat, there was a second question around the urban and land link. And as you know, some people are raising questions around why the focus on land, in light of people's urbanization trends and so forth. And my response to that would be, actually, the debate around urbanization and land is adding a dimension to the land question and not making it less important, for several reasons. One, there's an issue around land and spatial planning, particularly when it comes to competing interests between social infrastructure such as housing in communities and developing more commercial-orientated infrastructure. And we've seen the various incidents that have happened in various townships in the country. But the second thing is that also the international chapters, especially the Zimbabwean one, shows that even when we have urban migration, workers still keep a link with their homestead back home, and that's an interesting phenomenon because they keep that link with that land for social security purposes. And then the third point to make around the urban land link is also, we know that there's also a farming or agricultural activity that takes place within urban areas itself. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Prof. Baynant.
Thanks very much. The question, as I understand it, is, are there examples of locally generated forms of land administration and planning administration in a way? And the answer is yes, very many. In fact, in certain respects, because the national system of land administration has broken down, or at least is not uniformly implemented, these are very widespread, and there is good literature about them. For example, in the Hornby et al. Book, Land Untitled, there's been a very interesting recent paper, Barry and Kingle, on Monmar-BC Park in Cape Town, looking at an informal land administration and allocation system. Many informal settlements have such, you could call them systems or practices. In an area where I've worked, Mngungundlovu, that's just near, Kolobeni is in Mngungundlovu, on 3 different cases over there. There are 3 or 4 different localized systems of landed and you could say planning or distribution mechanisms. I mean, in Kolobeni itself, there's good research from the court case, and the local, it's a head woman at present, and her council have broken away from the old traditional authority. They formed their own system, and they keep a written record of land allocations. They don't have a villageization system where everybody's clustered in one village. Land is still held in its old dispersed form. But yet, not far away in Kolweni, where I was involved in a case where a community have successfully been able to get restitution of land that was used for sugar, they've decided not to move onto the land at all. And a CPA has been formed, and they hope that they'll be able to use this land commercially. And what I'm sort of trying to say is that if you look on the ground, there are many different forms of, let's call it, ownership, control, administration of land, yet these can also be counterproductive. I mean, in some ways, it make it very difficult for external agencies which are required to put in the capital for planning and development to assist and connect.
Thank you so much, Prof. Baynard. I am starting to really worry about time, and I do see that our contributors have tried to answer some of the questions through the chat. I just want to maybe give Star or the minister a platform if they want to maybe address anything that they might have spotted on the chat. But otherwise, after that, I will be forced to close this discussion. Star, are you covered?
Yes, Pogas, I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister, anything you may want to touch on or address?
Well, I'm fine.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I muted my camera there to allow the minister to go on. But colleagues, I would like to thank everyone that participated in the launch discussion today. I'd like to thank the minister as well. And thank you to everyone for respecting the House rules from the chair. I mean, we can speak about land reform the whole day, but we need to also respect your time. And as MISTRA, we always have post-launch activities around our publication launches. So we will definitely continue this discussion, whether it's in a boardroom setup or we, if it means hosting another public engagement, we will definitely look into those things. But I would like to, before I go off, I would like to call on our Director of Research, Professor Susan Boyson, and she's going to do the closing remarks for us. But from my side, thank you very much and have a wonderful evening. Prof, you had
Thank you.
By yourself there.
Thank you. There was a technical glitch here. My apologies to everybody. I was just thanking from the bottom of my heart all participants participants in this event today, especially in the first place, Minister Didiza, thank you very much for making yourself available and for giving us a sense of where government stands, where you and your department stand in this very important debate, and also how you relate to not just the book itself, which I really believe will be opening debates and helped us to understand further the nuances and the complexities of this whole process, and to appreciate the book and also to take forward the policy brief that is really very informative and really help us understand and develop empathy where perhaps they have not been for many of these issues that are involved in this very complex, nuanced issue of land. I want to thank in particular too the editors, Pulelwa, Kwezi, Mabaza, and Mabaza, and all the authors that participated in and added their insights and their research to this project. Thank you very, very much. I really believe it helped to create a book that adds to the literature, that adds to our understandings, because we know without land belonging livelihoods, there is no nation. And without better understandings of the gaps, the omissions to date in policy and legislation, and without having that mutual empathy for those who have, and especially for those who do not have land, then we will have no nation. And I really think this book will be adding a great new set of new dimensions to this book. I also want to thank the Department of Science and Technology. They have generally been supporting this project for MISTRA. Thank you very much. Thank you to the board and the council of MISTRA for much of the intellectual leadership, along with the executive director of MISTRA, that you all have been adding to this manuscript. Internally to MISTRA, of course, there are always big teams of very competent, skilled people who add to these projects. Wandile Mweni, Njabulo Zwane, Terry Shakinowski on the publication side. To all of you, thank you very much for the huge contribution to making this project become a reality. And then I want to say thank you very much again to the two editors for giving the intellectual content, shaping the intellectual content and policy content, policy relevant content of this book. I want to urge you all to buy this book actually, and to email terrys@mistra.org.za. I'll repeat that, that is terrys@mistra.org.za, and she will make all arrangements for you to activate purchasing the book. I wish this book, the project, the editors, and MISTRA, where I also work, well in taking forward these debates and feeding the valuable findings of this manuscript into public understandings in future policy deliberations. I thank you all. What a wonderful, esteemed, big audience we have of all participants. I thank you all for taking the 2 hours to listen, to ask your questions, to be part of this MISTRA project. I hope you remain part of this project. Link into our website, to our updates. We look forward to retaining good contact with all of you. And thank you very much. Thank you. Back to you, Sipokazi.